Hello and welcome. I am Maestra Teacher and this is my 5th grade Oasis channel. I've been a teacher for more than 20 years. I've taught gen ed and bilingual classes as well. In today's video, I would like to share with you my strategies for teaching poetry in 5th grade. If you are a new teacher or new to 5th grade, know that poetry is one standard that you must teach several times throughout the year. Sometimes the students come with a background knowledge about poetry, but sometimes they do not. Know that at a 5th grade level, it is expected from the students that when they read a poem, they should be able to identify all the different kinds of poetic devices that poets use to enhance their poetry. These may include rhyme, repetition, figurative language, imagery, and also alliteration, onomatopoeia, all those different concepts that again they might have learned before or they have not. My best advice when you're teaching poetry in 5th grade is that you kind of chunk it so that you don't give all the devices at once that can confuse students and make them overwhelmed. You can begin by explaining to them that there's different kinds of poems, that there are poems that rhyme, that there's free verse poems, that there are other kind of poems that are called haikus or those kind of structures. Then you can go ahead and start by talking about that poems are written in stanzas, that poems have verses, and you explain the basics of the format of a poem. Then you can teach the simpler parts of the poetic devices, such as rhyme and repetition. Usually they already know what a rhyme is because in the lower grades they've done it before, so it's easy for them. You just have to review what are rhyming words and repetition and how do those affect the poem or enhance it. After you're done reviewing what is a rhyme, and you can go ahead now and introduce a rhyming pattern. So students can see that poetry actually have patterns and you teach them the concept of rhyming patterns. Then you can increase the difficulty by adding then onomatopoeia and explain to the children how onomatopoeia is used in a poem, and then you can include alliteration as well. And then the final part that you teach are the figurative language and imagery, which includes, of course, everything, language that is appealing to the senses. And when it comes to figurative language, you have to teach them what is a simile, metaphor, personification, hyperbole, and so on. After you're done teaching all those poetic devices and those the structure of poetry and so on, then students are ready to begin reading different poems and identifying the different poetic devices throughout them, or they can even write their own poem and they can include some of those poetic devices as well. I will show you now an example of how I did one of the lessons this week on poetry, which was to use the I do, we do, you do lesson model because it's easier for me and I think it's quite effective. For the I do lesson model, as you can see here, here's the basic presentation I used this week. I usually do my presentations in a Google slide. I always start by showing the students what is the theme or what is the skill of the week, which is, of course, poetry. I asked them, what do you know about poetry? And we started discussion about what they know. I want to know what they bring with them about the theme. Then I also present to them and tell them, well, this week we're going to be reading these specific poems. I do my presentations bilingually because, of course, I have English and Spanish students as well. I always remind them what unit or module we're working on so they keep track of where we are. And I then present officially the definition of what is poetry. For the English group, I present it in English. They write it down in their journals to keep track of their vocabulary, in Spanish as well. Then we talked about, as I mentioned earlier, I explained to them what are the different parts of a poem. The poems have stanza. I will go really quick here in this presentation, but I take my time on each one of these poetic devices. We practice, we watch, we talked about the definitions. They wrote it all down. They created like a little booklet where they kept track of all these vocabulary words and concepts. We talk about each one at a time. I cannot do them all at once. So as I said, just a little bit at a time. The last one I did was similes and metaphors. I wanted to show you there's plenty of videos and internet resources, especially in TPT, related to similes and metaphor in English and Spanish. I play for them a video this is the Spanish one, on how to do similes in metaphors. There's another one that I use for English. I like this one a lot. It's like a song on similes and metaphors. You can find this one's in YouTube. The kids really like it, and they start singing it. And again, I presented, this is what we worked. This part we did in the We Do. This is what I showed them. We were practicing together, like with several examples, and they had to decide if it was simile or a metaphor. I did the same activity for the English group and the Spanish group as well. Then after you present all of them, we practice, and now this is the next day when we actually started officially reading the reading of the week. We went over the vocabulary again, and then we read and discussed the poem of the week, the one in our textbook. And then we do some writing activities and so on and so forth. For the We Do part of the lesson, now that you've presented them the specific skill of the day, either rhyming, onomatopoeia, alliteration, whatever it is that you're teaching on that day, then you work with them together. You can present several poems that show or demonstrate the skill, the poetic device that you're teaching specifically on that day, as you can see here. This is one of the examples I used when we were practicing together. We would read each one and identify it as a simile or metaphor. And they really, later on, they created their own. So it was really interesting and they really enjoyed it. For the You Do part of the lesson, now you can give students a brand new poem and they can either identify it, whatever device you practice on that day, or they can even write their own poems using that device as well. Here are some examples, as you can see. We practiced together creating poetry using some of the devices. I told them they can choose either one of them or two of them or all of them, but I wanted them to create poems related to Halloween or autumn. And they came up with some great poetry, and we displayed them all outside the classroom. And as I showed you earlier, they also created their own similes and metaphors. And of course, one more thing that I always mention on all my videos, after you're done teaching the skill of the week, make sure you present it to the students so they can see also how this standard is going to look like in the state test. You bring the example to the students, you practice together, and you go over it with them so they are aware that this is going to be tested certain way. And here's the example. I use this one with my students. We practice different poems from how it are going to look like in the state test. You can find examples on how this is going to look like on the state test. For example, I live in Texas, and here we have a website that we can go and see previous tests, and that's where I get these examples from. Well, there you have it. That's the way I teach a basic lesson of poetry in 5th grade. Please let me know in the comments your opinions, or maybe you can share with me how you do your poetry lesson. I would love to read from you. Please like my video as well, subscribe to my brand new channel, and I'll see you in my next one. See you soon.